Vivian Banshee is still the only Ether Anomaly agent in ZenlessZoneZero, and she remains one of, if not the best sub-DPS options for Anomaly teams. Luckily, she's making her first rerun in version 2.3 alongside Lucia and a new swimsuit skin, but many are wondering if she's still worth pulling for. Worry not though, as in today's video, we'll be breaking down everything you need to know when playing Vivian. As a quick disclaimer, some of the footage shown is from the creator beta server, but with this out of the way, if this video helps, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Lootbar. Recharging in ZenlessZoneZero can get pretty expensive fast. There's so many agents to pull for, and if you're like me, you really can't help yourself. That's where the sponsor of today's video, Lootbar, comes in, as it lets you get the same packs for less than what you'd pay for in-game. This is a platform that covers Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, and other titles, including ZenlessZoneZero, and the layout is simple, and since it's set up just like the in-game shop, it doesn't feel super clumsy or uncomfortable to use. Now, when you choose ZenlessZoneZero in the menu, however, you'll see that Lootbar offers up to 23% lower prices compared to in-game purchases. On top of this, brand new users can claim an extra 10% off coupon, making your first purchase even cheaper. But now, here's a side-by-side comparison in terms of price. This bundle costs the full amount in-game, but through Lootbar, it's noticeably cheaper, and the more you recharge, the bigger the difference becomes. Now, Lootbar has also been used by many different members of the community. They've collaborated with other YouTubers. They also cover the 5% tax, provide 7 days of after-sales service, and only need your account ID to recharge. Now, when you actually go to purchase something, it's pretty quick and easy. All you need to do is enter your account ID, pick the pack you want, and then check out. Your order usually arrives in about 30 minutes or less, so you won't be left waiting. So if you're looking to top up in ZenlessZoneZero, Lootbar is the way to go. Just click on the link in the comments or description to get started, and don't forget, new players get a 10% off coupon. Grab it while you can. Thanks again to Lootbar for sponsoring today's video though. Vivian's gameplay revolves around dealing damage and buffing her allies from off-field, but it's important to note that she does take a bit of planning and setup before you can really play her as the no on-field playtime agent that we all know and love. Her actual play revolves around building up her special resource, converting it, and then spending it once a teammate triggers an anomaly, making her one of the most unique and powerful anomaly agents to date. With this, Vivian does share similarities to someone like Bernice, capable of activating anomaly effects from off-field, but she is slightly more complicated in terms of how her kit works and how she generates/uses her special resource. Now let's break down her kit, beginning with her special mechanic and resources. Vivian's main mechanic revolves around the Noblewoman state, which she enters after certain actions like a perfect dodge, the 4th hit of her combo, or a quick assist. This unlocks Noblewoman Waltz, granting flight feathers and allowing her to transition into Fluttering Frock, her high damage form. While in Fluttering Frock, she can use Suspension, a strong ether AoE that also consumes all flight feathers and turns them into guard feathers. What's most important about this ability though is that Suspension can be triggered even off-field, allowing Vivian to automatically perform said conversion of feathers even without having to actively be on field to watch the conversion happen. On that note, flight feathers are the first resource important to Vivian. Flight feathers themselves are given through several means with differing amounts, and she will gain 2 when entering battle for the first time, 5 from using her ultimate, 2 from her chain attack, and 3 from her EX special. Now, in case you're wondering, however, the main importance from flight feathers comes from them being needed for guard feathers as a type of ammo or convertible resource. Now, when flight feathers are consumed, they convert into guard feathers, which enable Vivian's Feather Bloom effect. Feather Bloom triggers when allies apply anomalies or use EX special attacks, and if the enemy is already affected by ether, electric, fire, physical, or ice anomalies, it activates a bloom, dealing extra attribute anomaly damage. On a side note, Vivian can store up to 5 guard feathers at once, and she doesn't need to use all simultaneously. Vivian's core passive deals more specifically with Feather Bloom, and as previously mentioned, when this hits an enemy already affected by an anomaly, she triggers a bloom, unleashing an extra burst of anomaly damage, scaling per 10 points of anomaly proficiency. Additionally, when her Feather Bloom or Fluttering Frock suspension lands on a target under any anomaly, she marks them with Vivian's Prophecy, dealing 55% of Vivian's attack, which is also why she scales pretty well if you decide to build attack on her. Vivian activates her additional ability though when she's paired with an anomaly or ether agent, and with this, when an ally triggers an anomaly status, Vivian will consume a guard feather and launch a basic attack off-field onto the target. Now on top of this, Vivian also increases both the corruption damage dealt by her squad members and the corruption status disorder damage by 12%. With this, Vivian's role as an off-field anomaly buffing DPS hybrid makes way more sense. Now let's break down Vivian's basic attacks. Though she has 4 variations of said basics, what's most important about them is that her generic basic combo will send her into the Noblewoman state after the 4th hit. Once doing so, Vivian can then press her basic attack input to begin Vivian Fluttering Frog Suspension. Now, while of course you are able to sit on field and watch Vivian perform said skill, Vivian will still automatically perform suspension even when off field, and this is why it's best to swap to another DPS and allow Vivian to convert her feathers while you continue dealing damage on another agent, wasting no time at all. Now, as a final note, Vivian's last and most relevant basic is in regards to Feather Bloom. This specifically is what allows her to strike enemies with the guard feather from off field, consuming said resource, but it's also what makes her a relevant threat even while not spending too much time on field as a main DPS. Vivian's EX special is surprisingly simple, and though its damage is certainly respectable, what's nicest about said skill is that it grants 3 flight feathers and allows you to enter the fluttering frog state afterward. As a reminder, this is also what will end up being one of the best ways to reload / build her resource, so keep this in mind when planning out fights. Vivian's dodge and assist aren't the most special abilities ever relative to the rest of her kit, but since both her dodge counter, assist follow-up, and quick assist all allow her to gain feathers or enter the fluttering frog state, they're worth using whenever you need to re-enter said form or just need some more resource. Vivian's chain attack does deal decent damage and applies a pretty significant amount of ether anomaly, but what's also relevant about said ability, like many of her other skills, is that it also provides 2 flight feathers and again allows her to enter the fluttering frog state. Now finally, regarding Vivian's ultimate, this is yet another high anomaly applying ability with a sprinkling of damage, but this time around, while it does still allow Vivian to enter the fluttering frog state like other abilities, Vivian's ultimate will instead provide her with 5 flight feathers as opposed to the 3 or 2 of her other skills. This is nice of course for her off-field DPS uptime, but as we've seen with Vivian's most relevant use cases, the damage from said feathers is only one part of these feathers value, as the other more relevant reason for why her feathers are important is because it's how Vivian applies anomaly off-field and inevitably helps her team trigger disorders sooner. Skill priority wise, Vivian still wants to upgrade her core skill first, but following this she can then upgrade her chain / ultimate and special attack at around similar levels of priority. Following this, her assist and then her dodge are more relevant, but honestly upgrading everything aside from Vivian's dodge is pretty important for her, even if anomaly agents don't gain the most insane amount of value from doing so. Now let's talk about Vivian's actual combos and gameplay goals. Since, as we previously mentioned, Vivian plays similar to a hybrid between Yaniki and Bernice, one of the most important considerations when playing Vivian is disorder and tracking when she can activate a bloom. With this, however, Vivian does have ways to enter onto field with less animation time or while having protective invincibility frames, so let's go over a few of these methods and the value to doing them. Vivian's most reliable and generic setup is to defensive assist follow-up, EX special, swap to another agent, or swap off of said agent using a defensive assist / evasive assist to said next DPS. Now this sequence generates 5 guard feathers, allows you to generate daze and anomaly, and also provides you with invincibility frames as you use assists or EX specials to avoid damage. Now though this is simple in practice, the underlying and more important factor to manage here is her allies' anomalies. Prior to even using this combo though, Vivian's allies should already have applied an anomaly so that Vivian can activate a bloom when on field and can otherwise just focus on applying anomalies to the enemy. As for her second combo, if Vivian is already starting with her initial 2 flight feathers, a quicker combo is instead the following. Simply EX special, then swap off to another agent / use a defensive assist / evasive assist onto another agent, and this will allow her to convert feathers immediately while minimizing downtime. Now this sequence will provide Vivian with a max of 5 guard feathers post suspension, but the obvious and main advantage here is avoiding the need to wait for an enemy attack if you don't do the defensive assists. This situation is actually quite common and encounterable in many deadly assault fights, as bosses often have random attack patterns, RNG movesets, or some threshold that you may have triggered accidentally that changes their moves, and as a result, waiting for 1 or even 2 assists and the associated invincibility frames / daze / anomaly application can really make things unrealistic or outright clunky feeling, especially with Vivian. Outside of these 2 combos though, Vivian's gameplay is less about a specific set rotation to follow and more about maintaining buffs, avoiding overcapping of resources, and trying to apply as many disorders as possible without wasting potential anomaly buildup. Now while all of this may seem very simple and familiar to many players, these mistakes are actually way more common than you'd think, and things like avoiding the over application or over applying of anomaly to a boss using certain abilities will actually help and change your gameplay performance drastically drastically. Now let's talk about Vivian's builds and whether anything has really changed since her initial release. Flight of Fancy is undeniably Vivian's best in slot weapon, as it gives her 90 anomaly proficiency and an extra 120 stackable anomaly proficiency at full stacks, while giving a passive 40% anomaly buildup rate. This was and is Vivian's best option, with all stats and passives being extremely useful and obviously effective with Vivian's Kit and the more recent Deadly Assaults steering away from giving free anomaly buildup. That said, Time Weaver is also a decent alternative for Vivian. Unfortunately, however, the electric anomaly buildup bug that was formerly usable is no longer present and obviously usable on Vivian, as this previous passive was changed long ago at this point, where the electric anomaly buildup really meant that it applied for any anomaly buildup of any attribute. However, the increased anomaly proficiency and 25% disorder damage is still pretty impactful, though you do still need to consider how many disorders you can activate and how close you are to reaching 375 anomaly proficiency. Despite two parts of this engine's passive being usable for Vivian though, the engine is still roughly 19 to 21% worse than her signature. Fusion Compiler is typically a great all-around choice for most anomaly agents, but unfortunately this does still fall short for Vivian, as its passive provides anomaly proficiency, but this does actually have the restrictive nature of needing to use multiple EX specials to gain its full effect. Unfortunately, again though, Vivian doesn't really get to make use of this full effect because of her EX special being costly, and as a result, despite all the usable stats, this is still roughly 23 to 26% worse than her best in slot option. Now, for players looking for more free-to-play friendly or easily obtainable options, there are a few solid picks to keep in mind. Electro Lip Gloss serves as a strong alternative for Vivian, featuring an anomaly proficiency main stat and a decent passive effect, but at the end of the day, this is an engine that is tied to a battle pass, even though its passive should in theory still work with Vivian, but at the end of the day, this is still an engine that's tied directly to a battle pass, which does actually affect things quite significantly. With this, when at max rank, Electro Lip Gloss is actually only 16 to 17% worse than her signature, which is actually pretty impressive all things considered. Now, lastly, but certainly not least, Weeping Gemini is actually one of Vivian's best options, regardless of its free-to-play / more accessible side value. Its passive effect grants stackable anomaly proficiency, allowing Vivian to build up a ton of free stat over time, and since her kit thrives on maximizing anomaly proficiency for stronger disorders and anomalies, this weapon actually fits her playstyle perfectly. On top of this, Weeping Gemini is also conveniently obtainable through the gadget store, making it a very reliable and worthwhile investment for players who want to enhance not just Vivian's performance, but any anomaly agent in general. Now, what's most impressive of all, however, is that Weeping Gemini at max rank is actually within 12 to 14% of Vivian's own signature, which is pretty insane considering that, again, it's an easily accessible A rank. Now, for disc drives, Vivian's best choice here is the Faith on Melody set. This two-piece bonus grants additional anomaly mastery, increasing her main source of damage, which of course is anomaly and disorders, and the four-piece effect provides extra anomaly proficiency and ether damage, which both help Vivian significantly. To say this set is made for her is obvious given all the references, coloring, and clear bias towards ether anomaly damage, but for two-piece sets, Vivian has plenty of flexible options here. Chaos Jazz and Freedom Blues both provide a solid increase to anomaly proficiency, making them great picks for raw stats, and alternatively, Hormone Punk and Astro Voice offer a 10% attack increase, which some players may prefer if you don't have well-rolled anomaly pieces. Vivian can also consider using Chaotic Metal for a 10% ether damage bonus, but lastly, for players who struggle to maintain her flight feathers consistently, sets like Swing Jazz or Lullaby are also usable options, as both grant 20% energy regen. Moving on to Vivian's main stats, she does want anomaly proficiency on the 4th slot, as this is her best choice, and ether damage or attack percent will be her 5th slot, with anomaly mastery being her 6th. Now, for substats, prioritizing anomaly proficiency above all else is the goal, as this does directly amplify Vivian's damage. However, after this, you can focus on attack percent, and following this, flat attack and flat pen are okay, but obviously not preferential to the other stats I just mentioned. Now, for her stat goals, you'll be aiming for roughly 350 to 450 anomaly proficiency and roughly 24 to 2800 attack. However, you should keep in mind though that these numbers can vary depending on your gear setup, including disc drives, main stats, and W engine choices, all of which influence how her damage scales. That said, you could probably achieve something similar to or within this range with at least 24 usable substats between attack percent and anomaly proficiency. Now let's talk about Vivian's potential team lineups. With the recent addition of Yuzuha to Zenless, most of Vivian's premium team lineups will now consist of Vivian Yuzuha paired with some anomaly DPS agent like Miyabi, Yanagi, Alice, Jane, or literally any anomaly character in the game. Within this category, however, the best performing lineup was Miyabi, Vivian Yuzuha, to no one's surprise, and in terms of score and performance, the team cleared in about 44 seconds and scored highest at 46,000 in Deadly Assault on average. Now, replacing Miyabi with another anomaly DPS like Yanagi resulted in slightly slower 59-second average clear and a 39,000 deadly assault score too. Now, by comparison, when with Alice, the lineup cleared around the 52-second mark while scoring 41,000 in their respective deadly assault, but the slowest of all these anomaly-based lineups was Vivian with Jane. And now, though the two are definitely strong when paired together, recent deadly assault buffs paint the two to be slightly weaker than what we initially saw with Vivian, and as a result, though still great together, the Jane lineup was technically the worst of the bunch, clearing faster with a 45-second run, but still scoring lower around the 36,000 mark in deadly assault. To be clear, each of these lineups are strong against their own respective bosses / element weak encounters, but it is worth noting that Vivian especially is a decent brute force option when fighting against neutral bosses or when you don't know what to take, though you do need a powerful anomaly main DPS to back her up, and you of course need to avoid fighting against bosses that have high inherent resistances or just punish you for playing anomaly to begin with. Now, for free to play or more easily accessible options for Vivian, one of the most reliable but also one of the only teams that players have access to is Piper Vivian, and your choice of a third flexible option. Of the teams listed, Vivian and Piper alongside Lucy was the most comfortable, as Lucy spent very little time on field and had a very powerful M6, but this team delivered solid results, clearing it in around 83 seconds while achieving a respectable 23,000 score in deadly assault. While other teams like Piper Pulchra Vivian or Gray's Vivian Rina are technically still okay options for those who lacked an anomaly DPS agent, the recent deadly assault buffs or lack thereof punishes most anomalies as previously mentioned, meaning that even some of the more premium feeling Vivian teams are lackluster too. Now let's talk about Vivian's Mindscapes. For Vivian's first Mindscape, this affects Vivian's guard feathers, where when Vivian consumes a total of 4 guard feathers, she will now gain 1 flight feather. On top of this, all attribute anomaly damage and disorder damage dealt to targets under Vivian's prophecy is increased by 16%, and this accounts for a pretty significant 15 to 18% DPS increase. Her second Mindscape increases her ether anomaly buildup rate by 25%, and on top of this, the benefits of a bloom from anomaly proficiency are now increased to 130% of their original value and ignores all attribute resistance of the target by 15%. This is where most players will stop, as it provides a major quality of life improvement, but on top of this is also pretty sizable value, as it increases her total damage by about 25 to 30%. Now for Vivian's M4, this affects Vivian's basic attack Fluttering Frock Suspension and basic attack Feather Bloom, where they will now always crit on hit, and they will also increase Vivian's attack by 12% for 12 seconds. Now on top of this will also grant Vivian 5 guard feathers when entering the battlefield, which is pretty huge, but this accounts only for a rough 15 to 18% damage increase, which of course is pretty nice, but keep in mind that the guaranteed crit is less insane than you'd think, as we've seen this before with characters like Jane, where the character has either very minimal or no crit scaling at all, which again makes the crit scaling not super crazy or anything that you'd call overpowered. Now finally, we have Vivian's sixth Mindscape. Vivian's M6 significantly affects Vivian's damage and feather generation. Now, not does she only gain a 40% ether damage boost with this Mindscape, she also generates 1 extra flight feather whenever she performs a perfect dodge during her basic attack or uses her EX special. Now, even on top of this, Fluttering Frock Suspension will now also consume all guard feathers and trigger a special of bloom, with each consumed feather increasing the total anomaly damage dealt. And though this is absolutely crazy sounding, and while it does have pretty amazing implications for her new gameplay loop, this does account for a 40% increase in DPS, which, don't get me wrong, is pretty insane, but is actually not too far value-wise from what she received by upgrading her second Mindscape. Finally, here are a few pros and cons for Vivian should you be on the fence about pulling her during her rerun. For her pros, her damage is pretty insane if you pair her with Disorder or anomaly-based DPS, and to add to this, her playstyle is the perfect balance of semi-on-field and off-field, so you can technically still play her, unlike certain characters like Astra, but you don't need to be on field 24/7. Now on top of this, her gameplay is pretty easy once you spend some time learning when she can use her unique resource or build up damage, but on top of this, she's also one of the only and likely tied for best ether DPS currently available. Finally, she does also pair amazingly with Yuzaha, who was recently released in patch 2.1, and both Yuzaha and Vivian together are probably equal to each other or pretty impactful regardless when it comes to adding value to any anomaly team in general. Now as for the cons, she can feel kind of clunky if you don't manage your resources well, especially when it comes to energy, and though she she was obviously designed for anomaly only, this does still make her technically restricted with her usable team compositions, where she obviously is only going to be used with anomalies. Now finally, anomaly has also been getting nerfed and hit hard recently, with many deadly assault bosses being buffed to deny anomalies, but unfortunately this does mean everyone else gets hit too. Finally guys, Vivian is a powerful ether anomaly agent who's strong at buffing and adding value to most anomaly teams. Her unique bloom mechanic, ability to apply anomaly quickly, and off-field nature makes her an amazing pickup for almost anyone looking to play with anomaly agents. And with this, if you were on the fence about Vivian and her rerun, I would definitely encourage any Miyabi, Alice, Yanagi, Jane, or Yuzuha lovers to pick her up, especially since Yuzuha herself makes almost any team with Vivian crazy. Thanks again for watching though guys, I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy, good night.